Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Welcome to our book club episode for April. This month, our choice was There Are Rivers in the Sky by Elif Shafak, an epic novel spanning between 7th century BC to 19th century and modern times. This is the story of three characters, Arthur, Narian and Zalika, and how their remarkable lives are connected by a single drop of water. It's a story of erasure and memory, our relationship to the natural world, stories and who gets to tell them, love, loss and hope. If you haven't already joined us in reading it, it's out now in paperback and published by Viking in the UK and Penguin Random House in the US. Today, I am beyond delighted to introduce author of There Are Rivers in the Sky, Elif Shafak. She's an award-winning British-Turkish novelist. She holds a PhD in political sciences and has taught at various universities in Turkey, the US and the UK, including St Anne's College, Oxford University, where she's an honorary fellow. Elif also holds an honorary doctorate of humane letters from Bard College and is a fellow and a vice president of the Royal Society of Literature. As a novelist, Elif has won the hearts of many. She's published 21 books, 13 of which are novels, and her books have been translated into 58 languages. Her novel, The Island of Missing Trees, was a finalist for the Costa Award, British Book Awards, RSL and Darchie Prize, and Women's Prize for Fiction, and was also a Reese Witherspoon Book Club pick. One of my personal favourites of hers is her novel 10 Minutes 38 Seconds in This Strange World, and it was shortlisted for the Booker Prize and RSL and Darchie Prize. The 40 Rules of Love was chosen by BBC as one of the 100 novels that shaped our world. Elif was also chosen among BBC's 100 most inspiring and influential women, is the recipient of the Haldor Laxness International Literature Prize for her contribution to the renewal of the art of storytelling, and in 2024 she was awarded the British Academy President's Medal for her excellent body of work, which demonstrates an incredible intercultural range. I could go on, but basically, as Arundhati Roy beautifully puts it, make place for Elif Shafak on your bookshelf, make place for her in your heart too. You won't regret it. You are one of the greatest storytellers of our times, Elif. Welcome to A Pair of Bookends.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your very generous, very kind words. I so appreciate it.
I am so excited to have you on the podcast, and I can't wait to get into your incredible book, which I've absolutely loved reading. But before we get to that, I have to ask you one of my favourite questions, which is, what are you currently reading?
Well, currently I'm reading actually Hannah Arendt's poetry.
Oh, wow.
And I've read her political work for so many years, but her poetry is quite recently published in the English language. And it's amazing because she's such an amazing public intellectual and thinker, but her poems maybe show us a much more vulnerable side to her, very personal, very intimate. I'm not even sure whether she intended them to be published. I don't think so. She always kept them very private. So it's a delight, to her soul, her life to discover. And I've also finished a novel reading Abdul Razak Gurnah's recent novel called Theft, and it's wonderful. So those are my recent readings.
Those are excellent recommendations. Do you read much poetry?
I do actually, yes. I love interdisciplinary conversations, and I think we should read across the board, fiction
Absolutely.
and non-fiction. Whatever speaks to us in that moment is the right book for us. There's no such thing as highbrow literature, lowbrow, whatever that means. I think we should read also from all across the world, not only Eurocentric literature. So I read poetry, but also political philosophy. I read lots of cookbooks. I love cookbooks,
Me
graphic
too.
novels, Definitely fiction is where my heart beats. But I also love reading neuroscience, about history, microhistories. So just to keep the curiosity of the mind alive.
Of course. Let's get into your book, and this sort of connects to what you've just been saying, because I want to start by referencing a quote from the mind of one of your characters, which is Arthur. And you wrote, reading is a feast he can never get enough of. Does this resonate with you?
Yes, it does resonate with me. I mean, Of course, I think in so many of our characters, there are echoes of ourselves. In Arthur, definitely, I find lots of similarities in the
Hmm.
sense that the way he becomes so obsessed almost with the missing lines in a poem. That to me is remarkable. We will talk about him later on,
Of
but
course.
I wanted to honor this very unusual Victorian scholar that not many people today know about. Of course, my character in the book is loosely based on him, but I found that quite inspiring. If I may come back to my own life, I think books have always been my companions in life. I was raised by two women, but primarily by a single mom, by a working mom, and I was an only child. And there were lots of ruptures throughout
Hmm.
my upbringing, and I thought life was quite boring. It was books that showed me that there were other possibilities, other
Mm.
worlds out there, other possibilities of existence. So when I say books can save us, they
Yeah.
can guide us, I really mean it because it happened to me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so much of this book that stories are so important. And as I said in my intro, it's stories and who gets to tell them. And I think that one of the things that really moved me in the book is Naren and her relationship with her grandma, which is such a beautiful dynamic. And Naren is losing her hearing and is eager for her grandma to continue telling her as many stories as possible before, the inevitable happens. What do you think is the importance of oral storytelling and specifically how it connects us as people?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question because it's a subject that's very close to my heart. So I was raised by a grandmother who was very traditional in Turkey, and I was with her until I was 10 years old. And I think it shaped me in so many ways and my
Hmm.
writing too. My grandmother was not a very well-educated woman, only because she had been pulled out of school for being a girl, even though she loved education. And she wholeheartedly, sincerely believed in women's education. And she supported her own daughter's independence
Hmm.
and career, and that changed our lives. I'm also a big believer in sisterhood. I think when and if women support each other, particularly at critical moments in their
Yes.
lives, really the impact of that goes beyond generations. So I think there are so many things that I've seen, observed in grandma's house, and one of them, of course, is the art of storytelling. She
Hmm.
was a bit of a storyteller herself. All these folk tales of Anatolia, the Balkans, the Middle East, the Levant, the Mediterranean, they shaped me. They made me who I am today. Of course, I love the canon, the European canon of the novel.
Hmm.
And I have a very intellectual bond, a connection with it. But at the same time, I feel connected to a very different kind of storytelling. And
Hmm.
sometimes we forget that there are very different paths. There are very different ways of storytelling depending on where you come from.
Yes.
And to the best of my ability, I would love my work to bridge the written culture and oral culture, but also the art of storytelling that we find in Europe with the oral traditions that we find in the Balkans or the Middle East.
That's beautiful. I absolutely loved their dynamic. And I also really loved about Naren and her grandma that when her grandma speaks to her, she refers to her as like a body part. And she calls her my heart. And there's various parts of the body that she uses as kind of terms of affection. Where did that come from?
That is actually quite common. You will come across that in across the Middle East, in Turkey as well. My grandmother would say such things. Many Kurdish grandmothers would say such things today. So they will, if they love you and they want to express their love, they say my heart or my liver, the pupil of my eye, or all these body parts are getting involved.
It's so
And
beautiful.
yes, I find that fascinating how the way we express our love changes as you move from one culture to the next.
Absolutely. Oh my God, that's gorgeous. We will, of course, get into more of a discussion about your characters because I have plenty of questions about them. I loved them so much. But I want to ask you about the central theme of the book, which is, of course, water. And at the beginning of the book, it feels as though water has a voice and we're looking at the world through this single drop of water. And throughout, you show the impact impact that water has to these three characters in various ways. What inspired this sort of pull towards the theme of water?
Yes, for me, I think nature is so important. It's the biggest teacher, and I find it very troubling that we turned ourselves into consumers of nature. We tend to think that we are the most clever, that we are smarter than all the other species, we're above, and we disconnect ourselves from a biodiversity, which is so essential, and we're only a small part of it in reality. So I think we need to reframe our entire connection with trees and rivers and earth and mountains. There's a humility there to realize that we're not that clever, we're not above anything, and definitely we're not consumers. If we keep going on like this, we're destroying our planet, our only home. So I think that there's that kind of maybe approach in my heart. But I've also been very interested in water studies. And to me, this is a very important subject. It's not an abstract subject. Today, when we talk about climate crisis, we are essentially talking about fresh water scarcity. And it's very easy to forget this. Understandably, of course, all around the world, sea levels are rising. There are so many flash floods. So when we look around, it gives us the impression that there's an abundance of water. But the irony is, amidst this abundance, we are experiencing freshwater scarcity. There is not enough fresh water to drink. And for those of us coming from the Middle East, this is not some abstract hypothesis, it is an acute reality.
Yeah.
Of the most 10 water-stressed nations in the world today, 7 are in the Middle East and in North Africa. And what's happening right now is our rivers are drying, our rivers are dying every day, and it's quite visible. This has massive consequences for everyone, particularly for women, young women who are water carriers, who, when there's no water nearby, have to walk longer distances. Increasing, sadly, the possibility for gender violence. So all these issues that we put in little boxes, like water scarcity in one box, climate crisis in this small box, gender violence or gender inequality in that box, or racial inequality in another. But actually, there are no boxes. Everything is interconnected.
Yeah.
And I think water shows us this. If I may quickly add, I started writing this book not with these big ideas, in fact, but with a very small one, just a raindrop that landed on my palm, on my hand, and I was looking at it and I was thinking, can I see the universe in it, just like William Blake asked us? Can we see the universe in a grain of sand? It's almost like a mystical question. So even though this looks like a book with a much more broader and epic canvas, because it spans continents and centuries and cultures, actually everything started with that small single idea and with that little raindrop.
It's very powerful. And I think we could learn a lot from this book and how, we need to stay connected to nature. And really, I think in the West, we definitely need to reassess our relationship with it. It's kind of got lost along the way. And when you hear stories of, places that aren't maybe as privileged as us, you really kind of learn the gravity of the situation. I read that you have lived by the Thames, and I feel like that might have been whilst you were writing this book, but I'm unsure. Did that help you feel more connected to water? What was that experience like?
Yeah, it was amazing. For 2.5 months, I lived in a little house. I rented this place where I stayed literally on the water, so much so that whenever there was a high tide, the little garden would be flooded with
Oh, wow.
water, and you would see ducks and swans just swimming in the garden. It suddenly makes you question, where does the land end? Where does the river start? It also makes you realize what a dynamic river the Thames is. And I find the history of this river fascinating. As you know, the Thames is a zombie river. Zombie because not that long ago it was declared dead, biologically dead. Why? Because of the way we human beings have mistreated the river. 100 years ago, this river was so filthy that people thought no species could ever live in these waters. And yet the river managed to renew itself, recreate itself. And today it's almost like a miracle that it's home to more than 200 biospecies. However, as we're speaking, because we learn nothing from history as human beings, again, once again, water companies are pumping sewage into this river, which already, recreated itself. But having no respect for that, again, in the name of money, in the name of profit and greed, we're pumping sewage back into our rivers. So it feels like there's no linear history, actually. When you follow the story of even one river, it shows you the cycles within history and the echoes, and it makes us question this idea of linear time.
Yeah, absolutely. And like you said, yeah, there's no learning from history there, is there? It's quite disturbing. I had the quote written down that once you wake up on a houseboat to a rainy morning or watch the sunset over the river, you'll probably never want to go back to dry land. Have you now left the place that you were renting by the River Thames?
I have left. I have left it, but when
Do
I
you miss
wrote
it?
out, I do miss it actually. I mean, and I have friends who have lived in houseboats for so many years, all their adult lives, and they love it passionately. And I can understand why, because when you see, particularly when it rains, water everywhere, or the dawn, sunset, it gives you a completely different perspective. The colors. We tend to forget sometimes that this city, London, and of course the entire surrounding area, is very much shaped by this river. And it defines everything. So I think being by the river, or in Istanbul by the Bosphorus, for instance, it changes your perspective, and it makes you perhaps connect more easily with your surroundings, with nature.
Yeah, I think there were so many moments in the book that I was particularly fascinated by, and I can't imagine the amount of research that went into this book. And I'm thinking specifically of the water that we don't necessarily know about. And I think it's Paris in the book, or in France, where we think it's I don't know how to pronounce it. Is it River Seine? Is that how you say it?
I say
Seine?
Sen.
Seine.
Yeah, yeah.
I said it completely wrong, but there are, this happens across the world where there are bodies of water that we don't necessarily know about that have been built over. And I just found that concept fascinating. What was the things that you were kind of particularly struck by in your research? Was it things like that? Or were there other things that, yeah, you were blown away by?
The research for this book was insane. It was
I can imagine.
It was a crazy amount of research, and from water science to ancient Assyrian rituals to the culture of the Yazidis, the oral storytelling. But I loved it. I loved every moment of it. I like learning, and I like connecting the dots, but it was really hard work. I have to tell you that.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating, isn't it? Not so many scientists go into this field. We maybe don't realize that water is still, if not the biggest mystery in our lives, definitely one of the biggest mysteries. Scientists can still not tell us why it behaves the way it behaves. Sometimes it just doesn't behave in the expected ways, and the way it moves from liquid to gas to solid is just fascinating. There's something almost spiritual to it. We tend to think that the drops that we find in the Mississippi or the Gange or the Seine, we tend to think that these are different bodies of water, but actually it's the same drops that have been circulating again and again and again. As humanity, we have not discovered new sources of water, right?
Wow.
So it's the same water that might have landed on the head of a very mighty king thousands of years ago, the same water that you or I might be drinking in our glasses today, or might have shed as tears just yesterday. And I find that fascinating in itself.
Absolutely.
But also, when you think about rivers, the biggest rivers on our planet are unseen rivers, invisible rivers, meaning atmospheric rivers. The ones above our heads, we don't see them, but they're there. And then there are so many lost rivers, buried rivers. Again, we don't see them, but they're there. London is a city that's very much shaped by lost rivers also, but so is New York, so is Moscow, Tokyo, Stuttgart, Athens, beautiful Athens. You go, it feels like there are no rivers around. Of course there are. except they're under the ground. 3 rivers buried. So I think what's happening right now is with the sea levels rising, that system is not sustainable anymore. What we've done as humanity is that we deemed some of our rivers too insignificant or dirty or filthy or unnecessary, and we covered them and we built our entire cities above these lost rivers. And now with the sea levels rising, those lost rivers are causing more flash floods. And therefore, right now, there's an awareness across the world that says, well, maybe we have to bring these lost rivers into daylight, and it's called daylighting. And there are very successful examples of this in South Korea. For me, as a writer, as a storyteller, this is a fascinating metaphor at the same time. What else is buried? Where are the buried rivers in our culture, in our families, in our societies? And I think being a writer means not only being interested in stories, but also in silences and in those buried truths.
Absolutely. And there's a lot in what you've just said that sort of links to my next question, which is, who these issues affect. And as you said before, in the West, we're much more privileged. We maybe think that we're safe, whatever that means, because, we're removed from this, but actually we're all connected. It's not actually as far away as we think. And I want to talk about the community that you represent in this book, which is the Yazidi community, and you explore the treatment that they receive. And there are so many harrowing moments in the book that are obviously incredibly important for you to tell those stories. But even though they are harrowing, you include a lot of truth and it's honest. And a lot of it is from the research that you did for this book. Could you tell us about the Yazidi people and why you wanted to represent them?
Yeah, I really appreciate this question. The Yazidis are one of the oldest minorities in the Middle East and one of the most persecuted, misunderstood, maligned, and mistreated communities in the world. The Yazidi lore talks about 72 massacres, refers to these specific massacres throughout history. So it's not just today, but for centuries and centuries, they have been maligned and attacked in this way. People don't know much about them, and that ignorance, is immediately coupled with stereotypes and all kinds of cliches. This is a very ancient religion we're talking about. In 2014, ISIS fanatics, they launched attacks and the genocide against the Yazidi communities. And maybe not many of us noticed at the time that the very first thing that the extremists did was to kill the water. They poisoned all the fountains and the wells, leaving no water to drink for entire communities. And then when they attacked the villages, they killed the elderly first. Now, in a community like Yazidis, in which the memory and identity is transferred through oral stories and ballads and folk tales, not through written culture, most of the identity depends on oral culture. If you kill the elderly, you're killing collective memory. And if you kill collective memory, you kill collective identity.
Yeah.
The second thing they did was to kill the men, and then they kidnapped the women and children. As we're speaking right now, there's still more than 3,000 Yazidi women missing, unfortunately turned into sex slaves. And they are kept in quote-unquote ordinary neighborhoods, households, across the region. Purely by coincidence, one of these young women was saved from a house in Ankara, in the neighborhood where I grew up, very close to my maternal grandmother's house, just a few streets away. And I read about this and I couldn't get it out of my mind. How is it possible that a human being is kept under these circumstances for years and years, and the entire neighborhood doesn't know or doesn't see it? We're talking about very close-knit communities here, So it also made me question the notion of numbness. When do we become disconnected from what's happening next door, from someone else's story or sorrow? And I would like to hope and believe that literature is the antidote to numbness. It makes us care and connect.
It's really important for empathy, isn't it? It's astounding to me that people can act in such cruel and hateful ways to a fellow human being. We are so closely connected, and I think becoming numb to that is incredibly dangerous. I know that through your novels you have explored a lot of topics that you give voice to marginalised communities and the issues that they face, and you don't shy away from divisive subjects. And it shouldn't be a brave and bold thing to do. You know, we should all be doing that, but it is. And you were prosecuted, I believe, for your second novel, The Bastards of Istanbul, and investigated for 10 minutes, 38 seconds in a Strange World. And I wanted to ask, you know, you continue to tell these stories that are so important. What is your driving force to tell these stories and kind of override any sort of fear of backlash?
Yes, I come from Turkey, a country that has a very long and rich history, but that doesn't necessarily translate into strong memory.
Mm-hmm.
If anything, I think it's quite the opposite. We're a society of collective amnesia. Our entire relationship with the past is full of ruptures, and that void is filled in by a very ultra-nationalistic, imperial nostalgia. And that always talks about a glorious past, a glorious empire. But if you ask seemingly small questions about actual human beings, what was life like in the Ottoman Empire for women? What was it like for a prostitute, for a concubine in the harem? Or what was it like for a peasant woman who had no access to power, no authority? Then there's a big silence. Or the moment you start asking, what was life like for an Armenian silversmith or a Jewish miller? Or an Arab peasant, a Kurdish farmer, a Greek sailor, again, a big silence. So my point is, when you are a novelist, you have to be interested in these silences, in these untold stories. But it's very difficult. Novelists need freedom of expression. It's our oxygen. We cannot write any other way. And to be honest, when you're a female women, when you're a women novelist, I think it's even harder because you have to deal with additional layers of sexism and misogyny and lots of glass walls that might not be visible from a distance, but you bump into them and you hurt yourself. And anything that you write, anything and everything from politics to history to sexuality can offend the authorities. So in a day, you can be like put on trial, almost lynched on digital platforms, called a traitor, investigated, prosecuted, and so on. How do we write when all this happens? I think the only way is to make that imaginary world that fiction gives us our world, our reality, while we are writing a novel. We have to stay in that zone. To me, this is the only way, because if I start worrying about what the authorities will say, or are they going to get upset again, I cannot write.
No.
And I cannot, I'm not claiming that all these anxieties do not affect me. They do, of course they do. But there's something much stronger for me than my anxieties, and that's my love for the art of storytelling. I really mean it. When I write a novel, I stay in that zone for as long as I can and as deep as I can, and those fictional characters become my companions to such an extent that when the book is over, I feel a strange sense of emptiness, never a sense of achievement, always this weird emptiness because I have to let go. So that's the only way. We have to stay in that zone, stop worrying about what the readers might say or critics might say or authorities might say. Of course, when the book is done and I give it to my editor, then I have panic attacks, anxiety attacks. But by then, the book is, free and born,
Yes.
and it's independent of me as it should be. So all I'm saying is we have to remain attached to, connected to the ancient art of storytelling. This is older than us, wiser than us, stronger than us. And if we are in that zone, I think it will inspire us.
Absolutely. I think there is a line in the book, and I can't remember it word for word, but it's something about when books are published, it's like caged birds being set free.
Yes,
And I just,
absolutely.
it's a beautiful line. I love that, and I think it speaks a lot to what you've just been saying. I would love to talk about the characters of your story, who I love very much, and I felt sad leaving them at the end of the book. So I've no idea how it must feel for you. What was it like building each of their stories?
Maybe it's going to sound very strange, but I fell in love with this character called Arthur.
Yes.
Book. His name is King Arthur of the sewers and the slums, and there's a reason why he's given this very unusual name. This is a boy born in the slum tenements of Chelsea at the time. We're talking about Victorian England, and he's born into severe poverty, no proper education, no support whatsoever. Had he been alive today, I think we would have recognized the beauty of his mind, the neurodivergence of his
Mm.
brain, and respected this. But at the time, of course, he gets no such support. And purely by coincidence, he comes to the British Museum and he finds these shattered clay tablets that were brought over from the Middle East, from the library of Ashurbanipal, for instance. And amongst them is the Epic of Gilgamesh. At the time, almost no one can read the script on the clay tablets. And also, we need to bear in mind that these are shattered, so you don't know which piece belongs where. It's almost impossible to bring them together. And yet he does it. Little by little, he starts piecing them together, and he's the person who decodes the flood tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which creates a massive, massive debate at the time, not only in this country, but in Europe and also in America, because the story that he finds is very similar to Noah's Ark story in the Old Testament, except this story was told thousands of years before. So people get divided into camps. Those who are more inclined towards religion, they would say, well, it shows us that this really happened, the Holy Book was right. Those who are more inclined towards science would say, actually, what this proves is that as humanity, we've been telling ourselves the same old stories over and over and over. And this very shy, timid person, he finds himself in the middle of this massive debate. I need to tell you, of course, that my character is loosely based on an actual historical figure called George Smith. He lived, existed, this Victorian genius, and today he's buried between Syria and Turkey in a forgotten graveyard. And I wanted to honor this person, and I wanted to honor his passion also for literature and for archaeology.
Yeah, I mean, he's an amazing character, and I absolutely loved him. And I loved his beautiful mind, as you put it. And I thought it was so interesting in his story, but also in the others, this exploration of class and wealth, and this feeling of kind of not belonging, and spaces being reserved for different people. I think you explore it across all the stories in various ways, but specifically zoning in on Arthur. There is a moment actually that I want to refer to. So this is Arthur becomes very excited when he's a young boy, and he goes to the British Museum and sees this statue being brought into the museum, and he finally gets the chance to visit the museum. And this is the moment where he visits, and he says, "Sir, I'm looking for the Lamassus from Nineveh. Are they still here?" "Where else would they be, lad?" says the man. "Did you expect the winged creatures to have flown away?" Arthur stutters. He does not belong in august institutions, and he worries that people can sense it. It occurs to him in that moment that poverty has its own scent, an odour that emanates from his pores, easily detected. It is an awful, debilitating thought. Drawing in a sharp breath, he turns around and hurries in the direction he assumes to be the exit. The man calls after him, perhaps in sympathy, but the boy does not wait. The divisions that make up class are, in truth, the borders on a map. When you're born into wealth and privilege, you inherit a plan that outlines the paths ahead, indicating the shortcuts and byways available to reach your destination, informing you of the lush valleys where you may rest and the tricky terrain to avoid. If you enter the world without such a map, you are bereft of proper guidance. You lose your way more easily, trying to pass through what you thought were orchards and gardens, only to discover they are marshland and peat bogs. And I just thought that was such an incredible moment in the book, and it really resonated with me because I'm a working class actor and writer from Manchester, and it often feels in the industry that I'm in that I'm kind of shut out and I don't belong in these spaces. And I just thought it was such an important story to tell. Why did you want to explore, class and belonging and how those things intersect?
Yeah, I so appreciate this question, and I think it's so crucial. And it hasn't disappeared, as you so eloquently pointed out. It's not like this happened in Victorian England and it's over. It's still going on.
Mm-hmm.
And even in the world of arts and literature, where we wouldn't expect these glass walls to exist, they're very much there.
Mm-hmm.
Not only a glass ceiling,
Yeah.
how we're separated, it's quite subtle as well, but we sense it. And I think we need to talk about these widening and deepening inequalities. Being a writer, being an artist means caring about these inequalities and trying to find ways to bring us together. That's the power of culture. That's the power of libraries. And this is why I get very, very worried whenever there's the slightest financial turbulence, the very first thing that will be cut off will be support for the arts, as if it's a luxury that can be discarded. When there's no libraries nearby, when there are no cultural spaces, institutions, you're literally telling, particularly kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, stay in your zone, almost like stay in your banlieue, which is a terrible system. My point is sometimes music or sports or painting or a library is the way that shows us there's another world out there behind my little corner of the universe. And this is true for each and every one of us. But when you're born into wealth and privilege, those doors are open already. So if you're not born into that kind of privilege, then the paths are very limited. And that's why it's so important to support cultural spaces and libraries and the arts and bring them especially to disadvantaged communities. I also find it very troubling that most of our cultural capital is concentrated in London. We need to spread it out. As you pointed out, Manchester is full of creativity. Every time I come to Manchester, I feel that. So it needs more support, definitely. My point is, whether it's class inequality or regional inequality or gender inequality or racial inequality, they're all connected, actually, and we cannot keep them in separate boxes. And in this age, we cannot be single issue people. We have to join the dots.
Absolutely. And Manchester did get a little feature in the book, which I was very pleased with. I would like to ask, because we were just speaking about the British Museum, and it does crop up a lot in this novel, especially through Arthur, who, as I said, becomes fascinated with the culture of Nineveh, and he returns to the museum many times. I'm not going to spoil anything. But also later in the novel, Naren's grandma has this really interesting disagreement with Naren's father over museums and what they represent when they sort of take things from other places. And it's that kind of idea of erasure and stories and who gets to tell them and belonging and all that kind of stuff. It's all interconnected. And it's a very complex and layered issue. Could you tell us why it was important to you to explore this subject?
I think, like you, we have this in common, I can sense. We both care a lot about who gets to tell the stories and who is never given that chance to tell the story, right? That's how power works. And so the next question we ask is, who owns the past? Who tells the story of the past? And we need to open up this conversation. And I think it's very important that museums, our leading museums, should engage in this conversation and be open to criticism. Now, one of the many reasons why I love the novel as a genre is because inside the novel, you can hold nuanced thoughts and conversations, unlike on social media. So earlier we talked about Arthur and how this, or George Smith, and as you can hear in my tone, I have a lot of respect for this scholar, but at the same time, you can be quite critical of the colonial past and colonial institutions and how artifacts from the Middle East have been brought over, not only to the British Museum, but also to the Louvre, the Metropolitan, but also to lots and lots of private hands. That's another thing we don't talk about. Now, this was not a smooth transition. Lots of artifacts were damaged on the way. Many of them were stolen, broken. At the bottom of the river Tigris or Tigris, there are still Lamassu sculptures because while they were carried, they sunk. So these are things that we don't talk about. But while we criticize or we question this colonial transition of artifacts, I think as a Turkish writer, I should also be open to the question, what were the Ottoman authorities doing? What was the Ottoman Empire doing? Now, this is a question we never, ever talk about in Turkey. So that brings another layer into the picture, right? As in the case of Elgin marbles, for instance. What were the Ottoman authorities doing? But coming back to the artifacts of Nineveh, then we have to talk about ISIS. ISIS fanatics destroyed cultural heritage in both Syria and Iraq. They not only deliberately attacked these artifacts, they also secretly gained so much profit because illegally, there's an illegal trafficking of cultural artifacts to such an extent that at some point in London's Portobello Market, you could find artifacts from Syria and Iraq, right? So it's a very, very complicated and layered subject that requires calmer conversations. And we should be able to address all these layers at once. This is something we cannot do on social media with just angry sound bites. But inside literature, in a literary festival, for instance, in a podcast, we can hold nuanced conversations.
Absolutely. It's the power of literature and the power of conversation. And like you said, not just jumping online and having these angry sort of back and forths with strangers on the internet. It doesn't work when you do that. I am very conscious that we've not mentioned Zalika, who is an important part of this story. And I loved all the characters in this story, but I don't want to not mention her because she's a wonderful character. And I've actually forgotten, now that I've mentioned her, the title of her job title. But she's an important part of the story. Could you tell us a bit about her and how you created her?
Absolutely. So this book is based on three characters who seem to be completely different at first glance. They live in different eras or different locations, but they are hopefully connected in a very surprising way. I dreamt of them like atoms in a water molecule, like the H2O. So Arthur was my oxygen, Narine was one of the hydrogen atoms, and Zelika is the other hydrogen atom in my mind. She lives in contemporary London in a houseboat, and at the beginning of the book, she's going through a very rough time. She's going through a divorce and also questioning, asking existential questions. She's a water scientist. She's obsessed with water,
Yes.
but particularly she studies buried rivers, lost rivers. So thanks to her, I was able to delve into that world. She's also a child of immigrants. He is asking questions about belonging and non-belonging, ancestral heritage and her roots. If I may very quickly add this, I think in every family that has some kind of complex background, not only in immigrant families, in such families, there are intergenerational differences when it comes to the ways we deal with memory and amnesia. The elderly usually are the ones who have suffered the biggest hardships, sometimes traumas. They haven't forgotten the past, but they don't know how to talk about the past. So it just sits inside their chest, unspoken, all those words and memories. The second generation usually are not interested in the past, understandably. They have to build a new life. They have to be forward looking. It has to be tabula rasa. But that leaves the third or the fourth generations in these families. The youngest are now the ones who are asking the biggest questions about ancestral stories, about family silences, not only family stories, what happened to their great grandparents and so on. So I think in every family, there's at least one memory keeper. And in my opinion, Zelika in the story is the memory keeper of her family.
Yes.
So she's asking all these questions. She's also interested in this concept of water memory. I don't want to give too much away, but this is a concept that fascinated some scientists to such an extent that one of them lost all his funding, all his support because he became so obsessed with this. I'm not a scientist. I'm not saying this theory is right or wrong. That's beyond me. But I am a writer and I'm interested in passion.
Yes.
How do people become passionate about a theory that they cannot prove and they dedicate their whole life to that cause? How does George Smith become so obsessed with the missing lines in the Epic of Gilgamesh? So I think I wanted to pursue how passion and creativity work.
Absolutely. There is so much in this book that I could talk to you for hours about this book because there is so much in it. It's such a rich story and layered and beautiful, and I have no words left. But lastly, I want to ask you, what do you hope that readers take away from this story?
Yeah.
It's a huge question.
No, it is a lovely question, and it's one that I ask myself afterwards, not while writing the book. But I think this is what I would like to share with you. I want to go back to the beginning of the book. We talked about very briefly about the Epic of Gilgamesh,
Yes.
which is the oldest piece of literature known in human history. And before it was written down on clay tablets by scribes, it was transmitted orally for centuries and centuries. So actually, it's much, much older than we know. So imagine, ever since this story was brought to Nineveh and put inside this library in this mighty empire, so many kingdoms have come and gone. So many mighty kings have perished. So many monuments, even the tallest, strongest, the most impressive monuments have crumbled to dust. right? But a poem made of words and made of breath has survived. It has survived the tides of history. It has survived even the darkest chapters of history. And here we are, thousands of years later, still talking about this poem. So for me, I think it shows the resilience of literature. Literature has a very deep, quiet strength and wisdom. And I think, especially in today's broken world, we need that kind of wisdom.
We definitely do. I have a listener question here that I would love to sneak in, and this is from Joseph Dance, who is the co-host of the Curious Readers podcast. And Joseph wanted to ask you, Joseph said, I loved There Are Rivers in the Sky and was particularly interested in your treatment of ecological and environmental themes in the novel across different cultures and time periods, which I found really engaging and insightful. Do you have plans to write more about climate change / ecological themes, either in fiction or non-fiction?
What a beautiful question. I'm very interested in ecofeminism, the kind of feminism that instead of retreating into a box, wants to open up conversations and tries to join the dots. Because as we spoke about earlier, everything is interconnected. If we care about social inequalities, we have to care about trees, we have to care about rivers. Everything is part of the same ecosystem. So I love these kinds of stories. At the same time, with each and every novel, I like to write something new.
Yes.
And maybe it's a risk for an author. My earlier novel, The Island of Missing Trees, has a fig tree at the center, and I wish you had seen my agent's face. He's very Johnny is always wonderful and supportive, but when I told him that I'm writing a novel and there's a fig tree at the heart of it, and this tree is going to talk, and I saw this moment of panic in his eyes because it's such a big risk for a mentor. It honestly is. If it doesn't work, the entire book collapses, the entire structure collapses. But the reason why I wanted to take this risk is because I heard that voice inside my heart, inside my soul, day and night. A female voice talking to me, and I believed in her. So all I'm trying to say is, as an author, we have to take risks. We cannot keep repeating ourselves, and that's why I really don't know what the new book is going to be like, but it might be something very different.
Well, I'm sure we are all collectively very excited for more words from your mind. You are a phenomenal storyteller, and I absolutely adored this book. It is definitely one of my favourite books of the year so far, and I think it's going to have a very special place in my heart. So thank you so much for writing it.
So much for this beautiful conversation. I'm so grateful.
Thank you. And before I let you go, Elif, I have to finish by asking for a recommendation. So what would you like to recommend? It can be anything, books, TV, film, any cultural recommendation.
I mean, I read this book long time ago, but I loved it so much. I'd love to recommend it. Safia Sinclair's How to Save Babylon.
I've been meaning to get to this.
It's one of the best memoirs I have read. Such courage, such beauty in her words. I would definitely recommend that book.
Thank you so much for that wonderful recommendation, and thank you for your book, and thank you for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you, Elif. Thank you.
What a joy, what a treat. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. And Elif, I believe they can also find you on Instagram. Where can they find you?
Thank you. Well, social media is very tricky, isn't it? I've left some platforms. They can find me on Instagram, but primarily I might, if I may say,
Substack.
Substack.
Yes.
I would recommend. I keep my Substack free, and weekly I write essays on literature and creativity and the things that are close to my heart. And there's a very calm and diverse book community there. So please do take
I love that. It's called Unmapped Storylands, isn't it?
Indeed,
yes,
indeed.
Wonderful. I will link those in the show notes. But lastly, thank you so much, listeners, for listening, and thank you again, Elif. It's been an absolute joy.
Thank you. Oh, I so appreciate it.
Thank you.